Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Halloween episode of Sean's Corner. And today we will be talking about House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Before we jump into the review, I would like to shout out some other booktube channels that also have either reviewed House of Leaves themselves or just have more Danielewski content. So those would be the Book Chemist. I believe he has a House of Leaves review, and then also a whole video about postmodernism, which he uses House of Leaves as an example. There's also Books Are Better Than Food. He has a review up that is, I found, quite informative. And then the last one is Leaf by Leaf. And I believe there isn't a House of Leaves review, but there is some other books by Danielewski on there. So check those out. They are all very intelligent and know this kind of stuff way better than me. So House of Leaves is an experimental novel published in the year 2000. Already you're probably like, oh my gosh, an experimental novel. But I will say I actually had a lot of fun with House of Leaves, and I don't think it's actually that intimidating as long as you put a little bit of effort in. If you don't want to put in a little effort, I completely understand. But you know what? This might be easier if I just kind of show you some things. So I'm not trying to spoil anything, but we'll kind of talk about the format here in a second. But you'll see here there's a whole bunch of text, and then you've got footnotes, and you've got whole pages of like blank one word on a page. All sorts of fun stuff. What is this actually about? House of Leaves is, if I had to describe it, I'd say it's horror if it had a genre. That's why we're doing it for Halloween. But also, it's a whole lot of things. It reads almost like a textbook. So I think that's gonna maybe throw people off a little bit. I guess a better example would be just like a nonfiction book. So the format of House of Leaves is you have the introduction, or the prologue is by a person named Johnny Truant, and his introduction is in a different font than the rest of the book. Or so you'll see. I mean, if you read it, you'll see. So basically, Johnny, who's writing the introduction to this book, found these scattered manuscript pages in an old man's home. The man died, and his name is Zampano. You even see on the House of Leaves here, it says by Zampano with introduction and notes by Johnny Truant, which already isn't real. None of that is real, but that's what it says. So Zampano supposedly wrote this book that Johnny Truant he's assembling the pages. He has notes at the bottom. Like I said, it's in a different font, so he kind of interjects. So you'll be reading Zampano's book, and then you'll get to a footnote, and then it'll be Johnny. And Johnny starts off on topic a lot of time, but then he'll like segue into something completely different for several pages. The other footnotes that are involved are footnotes by Zampano himself. And so this is where I said it reads almost like nonfiction, because Zampano's work that he was working on, even though it is fiction even to Johnny, he has written it like it is a nonfiction account. So there are sources, he's citing all these fake sources. Now the question is, what is Zampano, what is he talking about? What is this nonfiction account? I'm glad you asked. Zampano was writing about a house that a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer and his family are moving into. And the photographer thought, as photographers do apparently, it'd be really great to document my entire moving in experience. So he set up cameras, all over the house to document like his first year, living there with his family. And sure enough, there's some spooky goings on that are caught on camera. And the biggest thing is that they're appears a hallway out of nowhere that wasn't there before. And the length of the hallway doesn't make sense. It's longer than the space available. It doesn't make sense. So I don't want to spoil too much, but that is the thing that sets off that part of the book. So once again, to reiterate, that part about the family is being written by a guy who died, and then he's writing it as if it actually happened, and then there's another character who is assembling the book and adding footnotes. What does this mean? It means that you can interpret this book a whole lot of ways, and I don't want to tell you how to interpret it. I interpreted it one way, and looking online, I think I interpreted it the most basic way that you can read it. But there are some other very interesting theories that, I could see reading it with a slightly different viewpoint in mind, and then it could be a different experience. Getting to what is experimental about the book, and I kind of showed you at the beginning. If you follow the footnotes, you can end up going back to a previous place and go over here, you can go over there, and you actually have to start turning the book to read it, and there's whole walls of text that are forming shapes. It's all very abstract. So I don't think, once again, I don't actually think it's that intimidating of a book, because some of the more abstract points of the book, like that, like it just described, where there's just like shapes and wall text and stuff, the shapes that are being made by the words, a lot of the time it'll be like this really long footnote that's like, oh, also reference these books, and then I'll have like a list of books, or like refer to these movies or these actors or whatever, and it will just be a long list. Okay, so I didn't read every single name in this bizarre text box, coming down the corner. It was more like an effect of, okay, if I follow this footnote, it goes here. Now I flip back over here, and it's more about the experience. If that doesn't sound fun to you, then I wouldn't recommend it. But I also wouldn't recommend, like I said, reading every single word. You don't have to. Other things to be aware of, how I read it. So I think I said earlier, Johnny is kind of it's an experience for him reading this. So he kind of goes through his own changes. He'll kind of comment on what's happening, and then he'll go off on this tangent about his own life and his own problems. And it'll go on for pages and pages and pages. So I used a kind of a double bookmark method, where if he went on a tangent, I put where that bookmark, where that footnote was, so I knew that I'd have to come back to that point once Johnny was done going on about his life. Finally, getting to the horror aspects of the book. I don't think it is that scary. I mean, if you're on the fence because you're like, oh, it's horror, I wouldn't worry about it too much. There's some creepy moments, but nothing. I'm kind of a wimp, so I didn't find it that frightening. If you put yourself in that position, it would be utterly terrifying. But, it's not real. I guess that's the thing. It's not real. So it didn't really bother me. The other thing is Johnny, as he's assembling the book, is also going through his own issues, kind of losing it. Along those lines, if I did have a criticism of the book, and I really did like the book, Johnny and his friend, who you learn about through Johnny's writing, they're kind of womanizers. It's anything like graphic, but they're very obsessed with women and like getting to be with women. So if that's not exactly your thing, reading about kind of slimy guys for part of the book, it may not be something you want to read. So there's that element of it as well. And actually, that brings me to another point as far as it being experimental. There's also in the back, there's appendices. There are letters. One letter you actually have to decode. Elliot and I took the time to decode the letter, and it's very disturbing. If you don't want to do that, you can look it up online. I found it later. You can just Google it. This is a musical phrase, so that's fun. If you want it's actually a fairly quick read. Like I said, there's whole whole portions of the book, you know, where there's like one word or something. If you want a medium, quick read, I would definitely recommend it. It is certainly an experience. I'll probably read it again at some point. I'm not in any hurry, but just thinking of it differently, thinking of who's the unreliable narrator, are any of them reliable, and kind of going from there. I had fun, and you just might also, or you might hate it. And if you hate it, I completely understand. This is one of those books where, you know, it's polarizing, and, you know, whatever you think, that's okay. I won't have my feelings hurt if you comment and you're like, I hate House of Leaves, I think it's stupid. I would understand that. But I think it's pretty good. I think you should read it if it sounds interesting. I've rambled enough, so have a happy and safe Halloween, kiddos.